name is Jack Barrich, and this is Ocean Solutions, a podcast produced by AltaSea at the Port of Los Angeles. AltaSea is developing the most innovative ocean research campus in the world, a place where scientists, educators, and business people can work together on solving some of the world's most pressing problems, including climate change, energy supply, and global food security. On today's show is Dr. Geraldine Knatz, the former executive director of the Port of Los Angeles. Dr. Knatz earned her PhD in biological science, and it is her passion for science and the ocean that led her to coming up with the idea of relocating the Southern California Marine Institute to City Dock 1, a 35-acre pier at the Port of Los Angeles. This idea eventually grew into AltaSea. I hope you enjoy the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
The Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach combined to create one of the largest port complexes in the world, definitely the largest in the United States, plays a key role in the global economy with approximately 40% of our nation's seafaring imports coming through the complex. You worked at both ports, and you were the first woman to be the executive director at the Port of Los Angeles. Did you feel any burden in being sort of the Jackie Robinson of women for the maritime industry?
Well, I don't know that it was my being a female that was so unusual. I mean, that was unusual, but I think it was more my background. Academically, I had been trained as a marine biologist. I started out in the port as an environmental scientist, and generally port executive directors, they were shipping executives, they were former Coast Guard captains of the port, or they were Army engineers. And so here I was, an environmentalist, an environmental scientist, becoming the CEO of the Port of Los Angeles. And actually, when I first got my first job at the Port of LA, I was hired because I was a scuba diver. And I worked in the water quality testing lab. And back in those days, the inner harbor part of the port was dead. We would go out and test the water, and if we found oxygen, we would be happy. And so
we didn't see dolphins hopping through.
Oh, no. We had a nematode that lived in it was a polychaete that lived in the harbor, Capitella capitata. That was all you found in the inner harbor. Right. There was no diversity here, and, really not much life at all. And so my first job was really to go over to Catalina Island, dive, collect some baby kelp plants, and bring them back and transplant them along the breakwater. Mm-hmm. And so, we have now kelp in the harbor that's kind of expanded from those very early transplants. But that's what it was like, at that time. With the current situation in the harbor.
At the time, there was a big push to being more environmentally correct. Do you think that was one of the reasons that maybe you got the job, because you did have that background, as opposed to some of those other more traditional shipping executives or the other ones that you mentioned?
Well, I think when I first started, it was a period of just after all the major environmental laws were passed. So, and the Port of Los Angeles was the first port that actually created an environmental position. And then at the late 70s, they kind of filled up that staff and brought in a lot of environmental things because we had a lot of environmental problems. So that was an important, that was a key time. And I think I was the right spot, at that for my career, because I was doing research in the harbor anyhow. When I became executive director, Mayor Villaraigosa was looking for someone with an environmental background, and that was very unusual because he realized most of the problems facing the port in its expansion and growth were environmental issues. And so I think I was, the perfect fit for the position at that time.
While you were the executive director, you looked out and saw City Dock 1 and saw something that nobody else did. You thought of it as an excellent spot for a marine research institute. How did that idea come about, and what did you do to get it started?
Well, I had been very familiar with the Southern California Marine Institute, which has its laboratory over in Fish Harbor on Terminal Island. And I knew all the universities were there doing research. And meanwhile, as the new executive director, you kind of do a scan over all your facilities and you want to look at where can I make improvements, where can I make things more efficient. And the time I came in, big focus on developing the San Pedro waterfront, as we call it, the LA waterfront. It's the longest stretch of ocean that's within the city of Los Angeles. And so it was like, okay, how do we energize that area? How do we bring more people to that area? And we did a lot of things. The Iowa came in, we had crafted. But, I saw the city dock number 1, a 35 plus acre pier. And, it basically had 8 people working there. We used it for storage of documents.
Right.
It was essentially vacant. So I went over and I met with the director of the Southern California Marine Institute. And I said, what do you guys think about maybe moving your laboratory facilities over to the San Pedro side of the harbor? And he said to me, I've been waiting 30 years for someone to ask me that question. So we set up a tour of the facilities and he came over, and let's face it, any scientific researcher who saw the space, saw all the berthing, saw all the warehouse, availability, just like, oh my God, this is fabulous. So what the port did then was we gave a $50,000 grant to the Southern California Marine Institute to do a visioning study.
Right.
Okay, how could they envision, being over there on City Dock number 1? And it was just sort of happenstance that shortly thereafter, I happened to give a talk before a group of women called Women in Philanthropy.
Right.
And so, I was talking all about the port, and just in passing, I mentioned the laboratory, and I mentioned the City Dock number 1, and the fact that we were giving these universities a grant to do a visioning study. And so the next week, I got a call from Leonard Aubie, who was the director at the Annenberg Foundation. He said, this kind of piqued our interest. We'd like to match the funds that you're giving to the university. And so they did, and SCMI developed this visioning study. And it pretty much focused on Berth 57 because they were looking at, laboratories for academic researchers. And so I went back to, the Annenberg Foundation with this, kind of a, study, and made a presentation. And Len Aubie said to me, well, that's great, but we were thinking of a much bigger vision. Big vision? You want bigger vision? Like, wow, we'll give you that. We'll deliver that. And so we came back, and then we really stepped back and looked at the entire City Dock number 1, all of the warehousing, and really started looking at, well, it could have, business components, it could have facilities for students, it could be research, it could be, education, it could be all of these things.
Right.
And so we went back, and I gave a presentation to a group that had been assembled by the Annenberg Foundation that included a lot of different philanthropies, and the big concept, and everybody loved it. And so we were aware that philanthropy money was going to come in. And then, the city of LA was, okay, now what do we do?
Right.
We're not really positioned to take philanthropic funds and do all of this kind of stuff. And we realized that a new organization needed to be created. Sure. And the city couldn't be part of it, but we could help spur it and get it off the ground. And so working with Len Aubie, a whole group of people came together, and they were the founders of Altasea, did all the paperwork to create that nonprofit.
Absolutely. So now Altasea today, a few years later, starting to be positioned as a leader in this whole space, turning to the ocean for solutions in climate change and energy supply and global food security, all these different great problems that we face in 21st century. Why do you think Altasea is positioned to be leader? What is it about Altasea that is maybe different from other places that could make Altasea a leader in this research space?
I think one of the fabulous things about Altasea is its location, right smack in the middle of, a large urban area. And so, the Port of Los Angeles has always been a jumping off point for scientific research. There were big research vessels here that would scientists would board and they travel off to the South Pacific and they go on expeditions and bring back specimens and do all that. But then there was a realization that, man's really impacting the environment. The urban environment is where a lot of these problems are manifesting themselves. Right. What an opportunity to have a academic research facility, a marine research facility, right smack dab in the biggest port complex in the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
And it just provides so many opportunities for collaboration. And in my view, here we are at the port, all the ships traveling across the Pacific on a daily basis. I could envision all those ships collecting scientific information as they cross the sea. Right. So when you take the researchers that are trying to solve problems and you co-locate them with businesses that are using the marine environment, they become aware of some of the issues and they help solve problems. And then when you bring in the business component, and we've already seen that happening at Altasea, where some business is inventing something and they're co-located with another business. I can use that tool for my research. Right. And so it's that synergy of co-location and the fact that Altasea has that space. What also is fabulous about it is it's in the outer harbor. It's sitting on clean water. In Fish Harbor, where the research lab is now, it's tucked away. It's hard to find. Sure. And most scientific researchers and a lot of the federal grant money that comes in for research, it has an outreach component. Right. They want that research turned around and they want the general public exposed to that research, the businesses, the greater community. It's hard to do that when you've got a facility the size of a postage stamp on Terminal Island.
Right, and smack in the middle of it where you can't hardly
right. Yes, it's hard to find. People get lost all the time. Even I going there before I started working at the port had a hard time finding it. Right. And so, we're very easy to find. We're right along the San Pedro waterfront. I think it not only brings a benefit to the area institutions, the researchers, and all of the businesses in the LA basin that are marine and maritime related. I think it also brings a real benefit to this community.
Absolutely.
Because it's going to be one of the great things that helps to energize the waterfront. So as we get our new San Pedro marketplace, all of a sudden you've got a, core people working there, that it's not just 8 people on City Dock number 1. Right. Hopefully it's, tens and hundreds of people that are coming in out of there every day, and they'll help energize the waterfront.
It's interesting because this is a community that was in many ways built on the fishing industry, which is more or less gone away, but now you have sustainable aquaculture as a potential replacement.
Exactly.
Where we're going out to feed the nation, where we used to do it with tuna, now we'll maybe doing it with mussels.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And there was a time where nearly everyone in San Pedro, every household woke up in the morning and one of those people came down and worked in the harbor. But over time, as things became more automated and containerized and whatever, there were less actually employees from the surrounding community in the harbor. And so here's an opportunity to create some new jobs in some areas that harken back to the tradition of this community. And most people don't realize that there are populations around the world that get most of their protein from fish protein.
Absolutely.
It's about 15% of the world's population. Right. Fish is their primary source of protein, or things that come from the ocean.
And we are going to have to figure it out, because there's a study that says by the year 2050, we're going to have to increase our food supply to feed the growing population by 60%. And we just run out of space on land to do that. And the challenge that we obviously have is to do it in a sustainable way. We can't
exactly.
ruin the ocean while we're using we have to have the ocean save us rather than the opposite, which is which was what unfortunately what maybe we've done in the past.
Right, and many of the very early aquaculture operations were not sustainable in terms of the effluents they produce. We've come a long way since then, and out to sea is like you can have your lab there, and you can walk outside the door, and you're right by the ocean. You can test something right there, and the water. Not like the days when I first started at the port. Sure. It's got excellent water quality.
And it's a great example of how science and business can work together, because those researchers can kind of work with the for-profit companies that can show them, hey, this is a more sustainable, cleaner way of doing business. So there really is a great synergy between the two.
Definitely.
Geraldine, thank you so much. This is really great stuff. I really appreciate you coming down and talking to us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to Ocean Solutions, produced by AltaSea at the Port of Los Angeles. To learn more about AltaSea, please visit altasea.org.